Chapter 23. Terry sat before Corlin with her legs crossed. Dressed in her white tunic reminiscent of ancient Greek mantles, Terry had repeatedly been visiting with Corlin for several weeks now as a student, and had learned much about the inhabitants of Galimar, who they were, where Galimar is located in relation to Earth, and why they were here. Being an archaeologist, she tended to ask a lot of questions about the history of the Galimarians, learning how they are an enlightened people, but how they weren't always so enlightened. Now they respect all life and live in peace, but long ago they were much like humans are now. Terry learned Galimarians have a life cycle much different than humans. Part of this is due to their environment and part to their technology. Corlin was a little surprised about questions regarding the atmosphere and environment. It turns out Galimarians breathe nitrogen primarily, in the same way humans breathe oxygen. The high concentration on Earth is just what they need to live comfortably. After looking at a map Corlin miraculously caused to appear, she also learned Galimarians live on an island between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. The island is rather large and designed to spend time on the surface of the ocean, but also on the ocean floor. A shield encircles the island at all times. When on the ocean floor, it protects the island from the pressure of the water, but on the surface, it protects Galimarians from the harmful effects of the sun. Although Earth is perfect for them, its sun puts out far too much ultraviolet radiation for their fair skin. The shield filters out this harmful radiation. The Galimarians come from a neighboring galaxy, the Large Magellanic Cloud, about 50 kiloparsecs, about 163,000 light-years away. Their social evolution progressed to a point where they recognized the obligation of each Galimarian is to pursue happiness and to explore the vast universe around them. They realized this alone brings personal fulfillment rather than pursuits of personal wealth and prosperity. Many millennia ago, their race figured out materialistic pursuits were the path to unrest, unhappiness, and ultimately death for those preoccupied with such. By pursuing a more enlightened approach to life, their race grew as a whole and was able to accomplish much more than they ever had when interested only in personal fame and fortune. This enlightened viewpoint was solidified after making their first contact with intelligent life on other planets. That had to wait until they were able to perfect interstellar travel. Galimarians live, love, and laugh much like humans do. One of the first things they discerned from their contact with other planets and races of intelligent life is the level of a race's intelligence is commensurate with their ability to laugh and enjoy life. Like themselves, when a race has the ability to concentrate on the activities of an enlightened soul, their minds are freed from the more pedestrian pursuits of life, and they're able to evolve at an exponential rate. Arts, literature, technology, music, and philosophy turn into full-time respected vocations for those who choose to pursue such things. Surrounding Galimar are 5 major moons: Ida, Genipar, Penelad, Demios, and Pylon. Also surrounding the planet is a set of rings made up of major and minor asteroidal bodies. While the Galimarians have colonized all the moons except for Demios, there are no colonies on the asteroids, though there are fully automated mining operations on some of the larger ones. The raw materials from these mines were used for many purposes, including construction of the Erigena, their ship which brought them to Earth. Through visions, Corlin was able to take Terry to amazing places on Galimar, teaching her about the culture and how it had evolved. Early on in their social and technological development, Galimarians figured out the great joy derived simply from discovery, so they embarked on quite a lot of it. Their first forays centered exclusively around their own biology, as well as the planet where they lived. Galimar was quite similar to Earth, except for some amazing things, including natural wonders like the Gardens of Amular and the glittering falls of Antioch, which glittered due to the gleaming scales on millions of fish living in the waters. One place in particular was really memorable to Terry. Corlin took her to a beautifully wooded forest, and they ascended above the granite cliffs which rose impressively from the valley floor. In this visionary world, Terry scaled the heights with ease, and was entranced with the unbelievable vistas set in front of her. At one point, she was taken to a cave behind an immense set of waterfalls. The cave went into the mountain for a bit, then emerged out the other side into a valley carpeted with vegetation and protected on all sides by impenetrable cliffs rising thousands of meters. This in and of itself would attract visitors, but what was truly amazing were the gravity wells of Mysticon. In the middle of the valley, about 300 meters off the surface of the ground, were areas where gravity was cancelled out. Scientists later figured out it had something to do with the placement and proximity of the moons and rings surrounding the planet. The gravity wells manifested themselves by trapping any rain that fell in them. As a result, there were entire bodies of water, miles in diameter, simply hanging above the center of the valley. They had existed there for hundreds of thousands of years, and entire ecosystems, including aquatic animals, lived in these bodies of water that didn't exist anywhere else on the planet. Mysticon was a favorite place to come and swim for the Galimarians. There was one cliff ledge which came close to and jutted out above one of the bodies of water. A typical practice was climbing out to the ledge and stepping off. As soon as you did, the gravity well would catch you, and you would then swim in any direction in the wondrous, flowing, undulating sphere of water. Since it was a body of water on all sides, you could literally swim along the surface of the water, look up, and see the surface of the ground. The first experience was a little disconcerting, but you'd get used to it quickly. When it was time to go home, the visitor would simply return to the step-off point and climb out. Long ago, the explorers of Galimar decided a new and very ambitious journey would be undertaken. Eden was the original planet to be visited by the Erigena. This ship was constructed for that journey and built in geosynchronous orbit around Galimar in an orbiting space dock. In only 2 months, the builder robots responsible for building the ship reported it was complete. The crew compartments were pressurized, life support was functioning at 100%, but all other supporting systems, including propulsion, exobiology, main computing, and stellar cartography, were nominal. With great fanfare, pomp, and circumstance, the explorers left on their journey. About a week after the initial shakedown and tuning of the systems on the ship, with the benefit of the few remaining builder robots, the crew entered their suspended animation pods. The ship, quite intelligent by Earth standards, navigated its own way to Eden, watching over them and making sure it kept on course during its 10-year journey, gathering needed power nourishment along the way. Once the ship came relatively near to Eden, it began its scans to finalize its trajectory to the planet. As it did so, the Erigena discovered that in the 10 years since it left Galimar, Eden's sun was on the verge of going supernova. Its gravitational pull had changed dramatically, and the explorers were being pulled dangerously close. Being as intelligent as it was, the ship decided the only way to save the crew was to fly toward the sun, then slingshot itself around and away. It did so, but, traveling at near light speed, entered an area of space not even considered for exploration. Since the main computer on the Erigena was programmed to find an inhabitable planet, that is exactly what it did, eventually exiting the galaxy where Galimar was located and drifting into interstellar space. Over time, it found its way to the Milky Way galaxy, where the main computer of the Erigena discovered a planet which was perfect since it almost exactly matched Galimar. The ship began a 5-year-long process of slowing down its speed and waking up the travelers. First, the captain was awakened, then he supervised the awakening of the other travelers. All this happened fully 1,046,732 years after they originally left Galimar, whose inhabitants assumed the ship was lost to the supernova witnessed through their telescopes. Initially, the crew of the Erigena didn't know what had happened and assumed they were now in orbit over their original target planet of Eden. An astute navigator and astronomer named Chekhorov Lenin began going through the ship logs, kept during the journey because he couldn't recognize any of the constellations he was seeing. Lenin discovered what had really happened, how far they had traveled, and for how long. To say they were astounded at how much time had gone by would be an understatement. Once the crew realized their entire lives had been forever altered, and that all they had known, and all whom they had known and loved, no longer existed, and probably hadn't existed for untold millennia, they were heartbroken. For a while, they felt paralyzed by their circumstances, and were despondent. Some wanted to climb back into the pods and go home, an idea they quickly shed, since their world wouldn't resemble what they knew at all. The crew understood if they returned to their home planet, they would probably end up as pariahs, outcasts among those who had developed so much farther than they themselves had, if their homeworld was even there anymore. Since their race was such an exploring one, probably none of what they knew was the same. Finally, Giuseppe Ucol, considered among the wisest of all Galimarians on the Erigena, spoke. A respected elder, it was he who established order among the travelers and inspired all to adopt a new life on their new planet, helping them see existence on this new planet could be one of fulfillment as well. His proposals concerning the establishment of a government structure identical to the one on their home planet were ratified by every traveler. Their island came to be known as New Galimar. All this happened thousands of Earth years ago. Soon after landing and exploring their new home, they discovered inhabitants of this planet were far too barbaric for their tastes. Based on their history with events on Traxxas, where local life was snuffed out when indigenous society was given technology well before they could handle it, Galimarians decided to isolate themselves from the inhabitants of Earth. In time, some became bored with life on the island of New Galimar. In keeping with the explorative leanings of their race, they decided to explore their relatively new planet. They had been there for more than 4,000 years at the time. They petitioned the governing council for permission to leave the island, which the council agreed to on 3 conditions. First, they couldn't take any technology with them. Second, they couldn't speak of the existence of the island. And third, they couldn't come back. Those wanting to leave were led by a Galimarian named Docius Atlantis. The group who left with him were mainly his own family. They were never heard from again. Learning so much was an odyssey for Terry. The more she learned, the more she identified with the Galimarians. Her hunger for knowledge couldn't be extinguished. Since she was so trusted, and nobody knew what was in the archive to begin with, taking the amulet home was relatively easy, although nerve-wracking since she had always been somewhat of a goody-two-shoes. She wasn't stealing it, she was just borrowing it. Terry wanted to learn as much as possible, and she couldn't do enough at work. She had to spend time doing this at home. It turned out she was able to spend time with Quirlin all night. Her body slept, while her mind spent time at the feet of her professorial benefactress. When she came back from her forays of learning, she felt light, refreshed, and new. Terry was benefiting in more ways than one. Inwardly, She felt more confident about making decisions without the internal dialogue of indecision, which had always been there. Her friends started seeing changes too. Even though she was obsessed with spending time with Corlin, she knew she needed to keep up her connections to her friends on the outside. It was Lynn who commented on how much more confident Terry was. Before she was more passive, but now she was more adventurous, more of an explorer. Terry laughed out loud at that comment. It made her think about the explorer nature of the Galimarians. Maybe more was rubbing off on her than she realized. In time, Terry realized she wanted to connect with the real race of Galimarians. She wanted them to know humans had progressed much farther than they had imagined. She wanted to know this race of wonderful beings she had come to love face to face. One morning, after a particularly fulfilling lesson from Corlin, Terry decided she had to go for a visit. She would take vacation time, get on a boat, and see these people herself. Terry was going to New Galimar. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.